So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of a very exciting series of events to celebrate the Sea Changers 10-year anniversary festival. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to have you here with us. I'm actually in Plymouth at the Marine Biological Association, so overlooking very sunny seas today. And it's great to be hosting this event today for you, for Sea Changers. And one of the reasons for that is actually Sea Changers was privileged enough to, or rather the Marine Biological Association were privileged enough to receive 3 grants from Sea Changers. So that was towards a Young Marine Biologist Summit in 2018, a Lou Bio Blitz in 2013, and a Capturing Our Coast Citizen Science event as well. So thank you to Sea Changers for that. But this isn't the end of all of the projects that they've given many grants to over the years. So it's fantastic to be here to talk about involving communities and species conversation and being able to celebrate this 10 years and some amazing achievements over those 10 years from Sea Changers, lots of impacts in marine conservation. And I've been involved since the early days. I've been very fortunate to be the patron. When I first had my discussion with Helen, I was absolutely just completely bought into it pretty much instantly from Helen's enthusiasm. And I think the success of Sea Changers is really down to Helen and Rachel's continued enthusiasm and dedication to such a brilliant charity. And they have done fantastic things. And they also have a lovely short film, which we're going to show you now, which summarises what Sea Changers have been doing over the last decade. They've given out small grants to enable over 200 marine conservation projects and distributed over £150,000 in that time. So a huge impact. So a real accomplishment. So Jack, if you'd like to share the film. Fantastic video, and that really sort of makes you see just quite some of the diversity of projects they've supported. That really makes my heart swell to see. So I'm really glad to have been a part of that process in a very small way. So some of the other things that Sea Changers have done over the time. Sorry, just before I do that, actually, just like to say a big thank you to Extreme Ice Cream, who have supported this and sponsored the festival, and making this possible, this event possible, and the other ones following on from that. Extreme is one of Sea Changers' newest business partners, and they're funding a Tackling Ocean Plastics Fund as part of Sea Changers' main grant fund from this autumn. So if you do know a project that would benefit from this, then do apply. So have a look at the Sea Changers link. I'm sure Helen or Rachel will be busy typing in links there to the Sea Changers website. So joining this event is free. Thank you to the sponsorship of Extreme. But it'd be great if you did feel that you could make a small donation via Just Giving, and the money raised towards that will go towards Sea Changers' main grants program. So you can see some of those wonderful projects that you'll be supporting by making a small donation for the benefit of hearing these great talks today. And if I could just ask Helen and Rachel to switch their cameras on for a moment. See if they're there lurking. There they are. Hello, Helen and Rachel. So these are the two people that have been amazingly responsible for Sea Changers, and they are sporting some pretty special t-shirts there as well from Sea Changers. So these are available on Tmail. I did order one, but it didn't quite get here in time for me to wear mine. So can you give us a little show again, Helen and Rachel, of your wares? So there you go, Sea Changers Festival for their 10-year celebration. So do have a look at those on Tmail, and I'm sure Helen and Rachel will post a link to that as well. So as I said, today's topic of conversation is about involving communities in species conservation. And there's some great examples here today about how people have done just that, involving the community to help drive marine conservation. And the public, I think these days, are even more enthusiastic and considered and interested in protecting our marine habitats as people become slightly more aware of the benefits of our marine environment through lots of sort of fantastic programs on telly, Blue Planet. So it's great to engage our wider audience and give them a bit better understanding of all the things that they can become involved in through marine conservation. So the talks that we have today, we've got Richard Unsworth. I don't know if you want to switch your camera on, Richard, from Project Seagrass. This is the only charity dedicated to advancing the conservation of seagulls. Hello, Richard. Thank you for joining us. So he'll be our first speaker. We've then got the Craignish Native Oyster and Seagrass Restoration Project, so linked in with the seagrass. Hello, Danny. There he is, giving a little wave. And this is a community group who led the first successful native oyster reintroduction in Scotland at Lochcraignish. I hope I've said that right, Danny. And then following on from that, we'll have linked to the seagrasses, and again is the Seahorse Trust, and we'll have Beccy MacDonald-Lofts, who is there. Some of you may know her from her previous days at Lundy as a warden. And the Seahorse Trust is conservation of the UK's 2 native species. So she'll be talking about that. And then we also have Rebecca Gillham. So Rebecca, if you want to just switch your camera on, who is from the Shark Trust. So she'll be talking about safeguarding a future for sharks, skates and rays in the UK through science, education, influence and action. So some really fab talks on a really great diversity of topics there. So we're going to ask the presenters to talk in turn, and then we'll do a little question and answer session at the end. So if you go onto your screens at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A function. And if you click on that, you'll then be able to put your questions into that Q&A box. And then at the end of all of the talks, we'll be able to get all of the panelists back together again, including Helen and Rachel, if you've got any questions for Sea Changers, and then ask your questions. We do have all of your cameras and microphones switched off, but if you did want to ask your question then without typing, then you can do so. Just put your hand up, and Jack, who's behind the scenes doing all the IT, will be able to sort that out for us, and then you can ask it in person. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start off with the seagrass presentation, which is from Richard Unsworth. So Richard, perhaps first of all, you could just tell us a little bit about how you first heard of Sea Changers and how they've benefited Project Seagrass.
Thank you very much for having me today, and it's lovely to be able to present to you guys and to this audience, because back in, I don't even know the date of it, it was around 2013, 2014, where we received a small grant from Sea Changers, and I think it was actually our very first official grant that we'd got off anyone, and that helps develop some seagrass monitoring work up in North Wales that we still continue to this day, and it helped foster the development of the world's biggest seagrass citizen science program, Seagrass Spotter, that has now had thousands and thousands of data uploads into it. So it's great to be able to talk about seagrasses and that story, I guess.
Great stuff. Yeah, I think the thing is the grants have seeded so many projects which have gone on to do fantastic things that have had huge reach, and that's really obviously an example here with the Seagrass project. So great to see. Thank you, Richard. If you want to share your screen now, and then we'll listen to your presentation. And as I said, do feel free to put the questions in the Q&A function at the bottom, and at the end of all the talks, we'll get the panelists back to ask their questions. There you go. Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me today, and I'm going to give you a bit of a sort of a very quick run through, I guess, on what it takes to restore seagrass in a UK context. And what I'm actually talking about today is a plant called Zostera marina that is still reasonably abundant in our seas in the UK, but sadly not at the extent it used to. And seagrasses are plants, so they have their marine angiosperms. They flower, they produce pollen, they produce seeds. They've got all those kind of functions of a terrestrial grass, but they're present in the ocean. And from that perspective, they create a great habitat to restore, because they produce so many seeds. But the key thing here is that they're homes for biodiversity. People talk a lot about the value of seagrasses in storing carbon, but arguably their primary role is that they support a complex food web in our coastal zone. We get 30 to 40 more times more animals present in an area of seagrass relative to an unvegetated habitat, because they create this complex structure that animals, plants can actually live in. So a huge surface area for microalgae to grow on, and with that all sorts of crustaceans, mollusks living in amongst that habitat. So it's a wonderful place, and many species of commercial fish spend kind of critical times in their life cycle living within a seagrass meadow. But I guess the thing that seagrasses are currently being applauded for really is that they're very good at storing carbon, locking carbon up into sediments. Seagrasses are a bit like trees in some ways, that they're not all the same, and if you put them in different places, they'll grow in different ways. I look at an oak tree that's growing on the coast of North Wales versus one that's in the park down the road, and they're very different in size and structure. So and that's the case with seagrasses, and therefore in terms of their role in locking away carbon. But we do know that generally it's a pretty big role that they play. Unfortunately, as many of you probably heard previously, seagrasses in the UK are not in a great state. We did a survey back in 2014 that looked at the nutrient status of seagrasses in the UK, and that found that there were many areas, actually the majority of the areas we looked at were on the edge of what we call a eutrophied state. Highly elevated levels of nitrogen and phosphorus present in the seagrass, and a huge amount of that nitrogen, using isotopes, we found to be coming from organic contamination, so human sewage or agricultural effluent. So yeah, seagrasses are not in a great state. And although we don't have huge, extensive records of seagrasses, no one had sonar or drop-down GoPro cameras in 1920 to look at seagrass. They didn't have much in the way of scuba kit. But where we've got data to look back on, it shows quite an alarming picture of extensive loss around the UK. Here's some kind of quite clear examples of that. From the mouth of the Humber and the Stour and Orwell, where there's now a couple of postage stamps worth of seagrass left, and those areas we know had very, very extensive seagrasses earlier last century. But scientists around the world have been working on restoration for a long, long time. When I first moved back to the UK from working in Australia in 2010, people laughed at me at the idea that we could start restoring seagrass. And they literally laughed. You know, I got mocked in meetings with Natural England and Conservation Council of Wales. You know, but we're now doing that because we're using the evidence that's been built up from the likes of Virginia Institute of Marine Science in the US, where they've planted 3,000 hectares of seagrass. We've used experimental evidence that's come from the likes of the universities in like Nijmegen University in the Netherlands that have done a lot of work on feedbacks in shallow water seagrasses. Great work that's come out of Sweden. And we've added to that by doing a whole series of experimental field and laboratory trials in over in West Wales, with some of those studies actually conducted in Falmouth and the coast of England. So we're basically bringing all that information together to think, yes, we can actually restore seagrasses in the UK. And that led to the UK's first pilot scale seagrass restoration project. And that was a project that led to the planting of over 1 million seagrass seeds. It was difficult monitoring them last year because of the pandemic. The available information that we've got indicates that there's tens of thousands of plants now starting to form a meadow, and they'll continue to germinate and grow and expand over the coming years. But that project very much relates to the theme of this workshop, in that it wasn't just about us as scientists doing that work. Collecting 1 million seeds, planting 1 million seeds was the result of a huge amount of work by a huge amount of people. We had volunteers on that project from every step, whether that was divers coming out, people wading, people snorkeling to help us collect those seeds. Then we have people coming to help us in the laboratory to separate those seeds out in stinking, horrible vats. We had people sieving the seeds, separating them out. Then we had thousands, literally thousands of kids, students packing these seeds into little Hessian bags, filling them with sand and seeds, tying them onto biodegradable lines to actually lay them onto the seabed. Fundamentally, this project has been about community from the start, and that's not just about actually involving communities in the hard work, but it's also about trying to work very carefully with stakeholders to ensure that we run a project that benefits everyone, that people understand, people can engage and be proud of. And I'm not going to hide from the fact that doing this in West Wales was a difficult process. There was a lot of stakeholders scarred by the difficulties, the failure of the marine conservation zone legislation back in 2014 in Wales. They were suspicious of people wanting to restore the marine environment. But by involving people in decision making, getting communities to help us pick locations, setting up schemes in collaboration with local fishermen, we were able to actually push that project forward. And here's some pictures showing the growth of those seagrasses from last summer, and hopefully we'll be able to get out this September and do a repeat of that assessment and show how the meadow is beginning to take shape. But ultimately, to conduct the project in Dale and to think bigger about other potential projects going forward, seagrass restoration isn't simple, and we have to do our homework. And that's the project that we're currently involved with, to actually think about other places where we can restore. We've got plans and proposals for projects in the Isle of Wight and Solent area, and potentially in parts of North Wales, where we're currently doing all sorts of things such as habitat suitability modelling, using existing data and comparing it against physical parameters of the local natural environment, and trying to work out where actually conditions are suitable for seagrass, and then relating those kind of models to information that we can understand from the local environment, thinking about the sediments that are present, thinking about the light available to the seabed, thinking about the nutrient environment that's present. So we're currently doing a lot of that sort of environmental monitoring and assessment work to really understand where we can plant seagrass going forward, and how we can do that effectively, both biologically and socially, to work with communities so they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and we can do it in a fair way that actually can benefit local people, local communities, and expand our sort of knowledge and understanding and benefits from the marine environment together. And that's not just about working with stakeholders, it's about working with other organizations, other conservation agencies. We're currently just done an extensive survey of seagrasses around the Solent and Isle of Wight area in collaboration with Natural England and the Remedies Project, gaining kind of critical information to expand our restoration work. But ultimately, this all points towards a bigger goal that some may think is pretty crazy. But I'm based at Swansea University, where ingrained into the floor is outside the local railway station is a phrase in response to Dylan Thomas saying that Swansea is the graveyard of ambition. And in response to that, an artist created this phrase, "Ambition is critical," outside the Swansea train station. And that's where we're at, because we believe that the seagrasses have been lost massively around the UK coast. And you'll hear more of this in a minute from Danny Renton. But we're working with a lot of partners to share our knowledge that we're developing, so that us and others can help us reach this target of restoring thousands of hectares of seagrass around the world, around the UK. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Richard. I love a bit of crazy ambition. I'm sure you'll be able to reach it. I'd love to see the people's faces who said that it was a project that they wouldn't think would make its way. It's often those ones that give people a determination and drive to say, you know what, this is going to happen. So amazing to hear and to see how much you've achieved over the last years. And a lot of what they were going on to discuss in the next couple of talks about seagrass projects as well. So we'll hear about some more of the sort of diversity aspects of them. So this ambition for 30 kilometres squared by 2030. So how many kilometres have you got within the sort of the Welsh seeding process that you started?
We've done 2.
Well, that's the first step. That's the first step. It sort of reminds me of the book The Man Who Planted Trees by Jean Giono. It needs to be a book now, The Man Who Planted Seagrass, to tell the story, but lovely to hear. Thank you ever so much. So we're going to move on now. Please do put your questions in the Q&A, as I said, and we'll ask questions at the end. So we've now going to welcome Danny. So Danny Renton from Craignish Native Oyster and Seagrass Restoration Project. Lovely to have you with us today, Danny. And again, if you could just tell us perhaps why and how you became aware of sea changes and how they've benefited your project.
Yeah, well, it was back in 2018, and we have a voluntary association here called Craignish, which is a Craignish Restoration of Marine and Coastal Habitats. And it's an organization of about 70 local individuals. And we were looking for ways of actively getting engaged in marine conservation. And we came up with the idea of oysters. And we needed a grant for our pilot project. So we went to Sea Changes, and they brilliantly gave us a grant. And that was the seed money that has got us to where we are now.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it seems to be echoing through many of the sort of grant project stories. And how did you become involved in this? Where did this start for you in terms of your interest and passion with sustainability and conservation?
Well, I've always been passionate about the sea, and I've worked in lots of. I've worked for the BBC, and I've worked in project management and archaeology and things like that. But I always wanted to come back to the marine issues and marine conservation. And about 10 years ago, I did a master's in climate change and development, and then the penny really dropped, and I realised I had to get into this sort of stuff. So I've been working in marine conservation, various different organisations for some years, and then we set up this particular charity called Sea Wilding. And it's just taken off from there.
Brilliant. Well, look forward to hearing about it. Would you like to share your screen and then I'll hand it over to you? Always takes a bit of going through all the screen options when people have to upload there. That's it. Thank you, Danny.
Can you see that?
Perfect.
Okay?
Yeah, that's all good. Thanks, Danny. I'll leave it to you.
Okay, well, this is my opening slide. So I've told you a bit about us already. So we're based up at up on the west coast, northwest coast of Scotland, up in Argyll, at a loch called Lochcraignish. We're about 40 minutes south of Oban. And I'm going to flick to my next slide and show you more or less where we are. So this is a satellite image. So this is Lochcraignish. It's around, it's about half an hour south of Oban, and you looking west, we're looking at the world's second largest well pool, just at the north of the Sound of Jura. And it's a very dynamic area, this. It's very tidal. In our particular loch, we've also got very lagoonal areas as well. It's quite a big sea loch. It's about 80 kilometers in circumference. So it's a fascinating place to be. And just to tell you about some of the drivers of change in Lochcraignish is we've got a very popular and much liked yacht centre, the Ardfern Yacht Centre, which has about 250 boats. We also have a sea trout farm on the east side of the loch, and our local population is around 600 people based in Ardfern. So I mentioned earlier on our voluntary association, which is Craignish Restorations and Marine and Coastal Habitats. That's our a volunteer group of about 70 people. So some years ago, when we got going, we started looking at the loch and thinking, you know, what can we do to change things? Because whilst the loch is a thriving loch and popular with all the people, and there's lots of biodiversity, it's not what it used to be. And we know from Victorian accounts that it was famed for its sort of plenitude. Victorian naturalists talk about sort of dredging the sea loch and coming up with lots of scallops, lots of brittle stars, huge quantities of oysters, and whilst all of these things still exist, they're certainly not in the numbers that used to be. And so whilst we're talking about communities, I'll talk about the importance of our community in the work I think that we're doing. As everybody knows, that there's very few baseline surveys, historical baseline surveys, of what was in the likes of Scottish sea lochs and around the coastline generally. And a lot of the features that we're now finding are not recorded, and they're protected features. So for example, if you look at the little chartlet on the left, here are in pink, those are various seagrass meadows. We have 10 small degraded seagrass meadows, and I'll talk about those a bit later, as well as other priority marine features. So, sorry, go back there. So not hugely informative, this slide, but if you, each of those little lozenges mark a priority marine feature in our loch, and priority marine features in Scottish law are protected. However, our loch is not protected. So we have we exist outside the marine protected area for Flapper Skate, which stretches from Loch Sween right up in the top of the Sound of Mull, Loch Sunot, sorry, down to Loch Sween, which is to the south of our loch. And this marine protected area prohibits dredging, and it prohibits bottom trawling, but our loch is precluded from this. So dredgers can still come up the centre of our loch and plough up the ecosystem. Meanwhile, we found all these marine protected features. Those include seagrass. They include a small relic population of native oysters, not more than a couple of hundred. But we've also got northern sea fans. We've also got evidence of a small merle bed, and we also think we have Flapper Skate nursery sites within the loch as well. And so I'm going to talk mainly about oysters now, because Richard's been talking about seagrass, but I'll talk a bit about our seagrass, but mainly about oysters. So back in 2018, we were looking at what can we do rather than just sort of campaign about, you know, dredging in the loch and you know, get exercised about these things. What could we actually do physically to do something towards restoring marine biodiversity? And when you walk around the loch, you come across these colossal oyster shells. And as I was saying, you know, they're almost all gone. Some of them weigh up to sort of, you know, 300, 400 grams, but there are still a few native oysters there. And the one in my hand on the left-hand side, that weighed 800 grams. But as I was saying, this is a relic population. You find very few small ones, which means they're not a sustainable community, and they're certainly not existing in the numbers that the Victorians were talking about. So look, we reckoned it would be a very good site for restoration. And there's one of our seagrass beds. Again, with our seagrass, it's about 10 small beds. This is one of the largest. It looks extremely healthy. Most of the others are very small and degraded. So our project, which I'll mention later on, is to enhance these seagrass beds and to try and interlink them. So back in 2018, we were thinking, what could we do? Well, why don't we try and set up a native oyster restoration project? And as many of you will know, native oysters used to be present in very large numbers around the UK. In the 18th century, the 19th century, in Edinburgh and the Firth of Forth, they were harvesting 30 million a year just out of the Firth of Forth. So it gives you an idea of the vast numbers that there used to be. And it's rumoured that the North Sea used to be blue owing to the filtration capacities of the native oyster beds in the North Sea. But pretty well, a bit like seagrass, they've disappeared right around the UK. Generally, we say about 95% have disappeared, but although you will still find a few in Scottish sea lochs if you look very hard. Why are they important? Well, this infographic is from the Native Oyster Network, and it demonstrates the vast array of eco-services that native oysters provide. Primarily, they filter and clean the water, removing nitrates and phosphorus and things like that. And a native oyster, an adult native oyster, can filter up to 200 litres of water a day. So if you stick it in a fish tank, bunch of oysters in a fish tank, in a muddy fish tank, 24 hours later, it's clean. Additionally, they sequester carbon, and as importantly, they create these very complex 3D reefs on the seabed. You get a huge biodiversity associated with that. Blue Marine Foundation reckoned that there were 92 species which will coexist with native oysters. So that's the importance of them. And if you can bring them back in numbers, the hope is that you will have a huge uptick in biodiversity, and that's certainly what our intention is in Loch Craignish. So again, still in 2018, we applied to Sea Changers. We wouldn't be here without Sea Changers. Hugely grateful to them for our pilot project. We put down 1,000 native oysters, which we sourced from Morecambe Bay Hatchery, and they did well. And following on from that, we then decided to go for whack and try and put down 1 million native oysters over a 5-year period. So that involved a lot of consultation, licensing. The licensing is really hard work, and it's not for the faint-hearted. It's not necessarily that the necessary agencies aren't helpful. They're becoming increasingly helpful, but it's because they weren't prepared for this sort of effort. Marine habitat restoration is a new thing. So basically you get treated like a salmon farm when you start filling in the forms. We formed a charity called Sea Wilding, and we applied to the National Lottery and the Esme Fairbairn Foundation and won funding for a 5-year project to put down 1 million native oysters. And at the bottom is some of our partners. We actually have many more partners than that now. We're working with 4 universities on different research programs to do with environmental DNA, environmental monitoring, genetics of oysters, all sorts of different things. And the Heart of Argyll Wildlife Organisation in the middle is a local NGO who does all our school outreach. So we have 6 schools coming to look at our oyster cages, which are hanging off the marina, which I'll talk about in a second. So back in, when was it, July last year, we brought in our first native oysters of 60,000. They came in as around 8 millimeters. They come from Morecambe Bay Hatchery. The brood stock is originally wild Scottish oyster stock. So they come in at sort of fingernail size. And then we put them in our floating nursery, which is a 200-meter long line. And this is in a sort of sheltered area in the lagoon. And they went in July, and during the summer months, they grew from around 1 gram to approximately around 8 grams, which is phenomenal growth. It was a very hot summer, and fabulously, we had really pretty well zero mortality, apart from the ones that I stood on by accident, and that's really pretty good because native oysters aren't normally commercially grown because oyster farmers grow Pacific oysters, which are the ones you normally get in the restaurants, because they're much more fast growing and they're much more resilient. Whereas native oysters are very slow growing. They take about 4 years to get to 80 grams, 100 grams, which is a sort of beginning to be a restaurant size. And they're notoriously fickle and they die quite easily, but we're not finding that. We're finding that ours are doing exceptionally well, which is very heartening. I was talking about the Yacht Centre as a partner. We hang these cages, we call them Oyster Hoisters, which we designed. We hang these cages. They're like, they have sort of CD racks inside, and each of them contain a number of oysters. And this is for our sort of public outreach component. So we have 6 primary schools coming to do sort of citizen science, biodiversity checks, monitor growth, and salinity and thermometer measurements and stuff like that. And they come, now that COVID's sort of beginning to ease, they're coming every month to do that. And it also allows us to do, we have another project starting with Heriot-Watt University to suspend oysters in these cages to look at carbon sequestration, things like that. So each of these cages are sponsored by local boats, and it's a wonderful way of sucking in more members of the community and informing them as to what we're doing. So far, as of this weekend, we will have released 160,000 on the seabed, more or less, sorry, 100,000 on the seabed, 50,000 in the nursery, another 100,000 coming in a few weeks. So we're very close to putting in 250,000 into Lochcraignish. And I'm going to tell you a little bit. So far, I mean, our first release was in October last year, 60,000. And our surveys currently is showing that they're doing very well on the seabed. We're not showing any signs of mass mortality. They seem to be thriving in the areas that we're putting them down. Just to explain how we do that, we go around at low spring tide, we go around the loch, we look at places where we're finding lots of native oyster shells and even a few remnant populations of native oysters. Those are the likely sites, and we do pre-surveys with quadrats and biodiversity surveys. We then put them at a low spring tide, we broadcast them onto the seabed, and we do immediate surveys after that. So we have a road pin in each site, so we can go back to the same site and look at the number of oysters and go back to that same site and see how they're doing afterwards. And then we have post surveys every year. So the importance is to do the research properly, to get the data, to input it into the national databases and make sure that everything is scientifically rigorous. And for each release, we have around 20 volunteers. So there's many volunteers involved in all these different things. And we lay the oysters around 100 per square meter, which seems a huge amount. And that really comes from sort of talking to others. Down in Strangford Loch in Ireland, there was an oyster farm that dumped a whole load of native oysters on the seabed many years ago. And there you find the oysters on the seabed there at a density of around 50 per square meter. So on the basis that we're going to lose some to starfish and crabs, we put them down 100 per square meter just to, in the hope that, ultimately we'd get down to about 50 per square meter. And these are the oysters just before we put them down. So they came in at fingernail size. You can see, how healthy they're looking, very clean. And that they're weighing around on average about 8 grams before we put them on the seabed. And this is us putting them on the seabed. So lots of volunteers, We'll be doing that this weekend. We've got 26 volunteers, and it's literally sort of broadcasting them by hand at a very low spring tide into the shallow water, and also by paddle board. And here's some subsequent monitoring that you can see. And we've set up these different training programs for biodiversity surveying and oyster monitoring. So we have several weekends of training this year, by which we train community members. And the whole point of what we're doing is trying to develop the methodology to do this at community. Sorry, I've got chickens running around me. It's a squawking. Is to develop a methodology by which we can export this model out to other communities. So we're now working with 3 other projects in Scotland, helping them set up. One's at Loch Arlin in the Sound of Mull. The other one is a rewilding estate, Kilcohen, and we've got a big project in West Ross under development at the moment. So our long-term goals are these, really. I have to remind the practical know-how and resources to roll out native oyster restoration to other coastal communities, restore marine biodiversity in Scottish sea lochs and inshore waters, create community-owned and managed sustainable fisheries. That's what we hope to do in the long term at Lochcraignish. Raise awareness of the destruction of our inshore seabeds and empower communities to be more active stakeholders in fisheries management of inshore waters. And I'm going to sort of beat the drum now a little bit before I get onto the seagrass, is that the Scottish Government trumpets that 37% of Scottish waters are marine protected areas. In reality, only 5% of that 30% are protected from scallop dredging and bottom trawling. And I'm going to give you, and there is, we feel, as part of the Coastal Communities Network in Scotland, a growing sense from communities that we want to have more say in how the inshore waters are managed. Up the west coast of Scotland, most whitefish stocks are now commercially extinct. All we're now fishing for is the prawns, and for lobsters and crabs, and scallop dredging and bottom trawling. And the fish that I remember in my lifetime have now gone in meaningful numbers. And so communities like ours really want to, firstly, we want to protect our loch. We don't want scallop dredging down the middle of our loch, not least because it seems to be insane that the MPA just finishes right at the head of the loch, and that was, our community was never consulted on that. So my next slide is just, is an example of this. So here's the guide that we produced. It's for our local community and for everybody else up the MPA to understand exactly what the boundary of the MPA is, because most people don't know. And this pink area is the MPA. These purple areas are sort of derogations in the MPA where scallop dredgers can go in, sometimes just at weekdays or between the 1st of April and 31st September, to dredge. And you can imagine this is a very sparsely populated area and it's completely unpoliced. So we know that the MPA is being routinely flouted, that in the winter months, scallop dredgers going on in and turning off their lights. They're not required by Scottish law to have their vessel monitoring systems on. And we know that there's illegal dredging on because divers go down and then find the evidence afterwards. And you can see next to the word Crinan, that is our loch, unprotected. And this is me sitting on the hill just a few weeks ago, looking out. There's the world's 2nd largest whirlpool, the Corrie Brecon, between Jura and Scarborough, and there's a scallop dredger out there. And it's impossible for me to tell whether that's legal or not. It's absolutely on the boundary of the MPA. And so that's really why us coastal communities want to have more say in the management of our inshore waters and more say in, in marine biodiversity and its enhancement. And here's another picture in another neighbouring MPA, Loch Fyne. It's a marine protected area. There's absolutely no protection. And that's a prawn trawler fishing literally within meters of the shore. And that was a photograph I took very recently. So to get back onto a slightly more positive note, seagrass. I'm not going to talk too much about this because Richard's already done it, but very excitingly, Sea Wilding and our community is pioneering Scotland's first seagrass restoration project with Project Seagrass, with Richard and company. and with the Scottish Association of Marine Sciences. And we are planning, using the methodologies that they brilliantly pioneered down in Wales, we're planning to harvest 100,000 seeds this year and plant 1/4 hectare of seagrass. And that's the first year. It's a sort of proof of concept project. We want to roll this out to other communities in Scotland. So if anybody's listening and they're interested, get in touch. And we're going to develop a sort of how-to methodology and a handbook and a film, so which we can take round to communities and try and get this stuff going with them. And it's very exciting, and that's being funded by the Nature Scotland Biodiversity Challenge Fund. So I think that's me really, but to say thank you very much to Sea Changes, because none of this would be happening without you.
Incredible. Thank you, Danny. I don't know about others who are listening, but I've just been sitting listening to your talk and to Richard's as well, just smiling, because, you know, it's so often that we hear so much about the pressures on our marine environment, and listening to both your story and Richard's as well. These are really fantastic examples of positive change and how individuals and communities are making a huge, huge difference. And it's very visible as well. And the fact that the community is so involved in this process as well means that in the future, the generations will say, I remember my granddad planting those native oysters, or he did the monitoring. And, you know, I think that's incredibly important to make the community part of that narrative that makes them engaged and makes them say to their friends, oh, yeah, you know, and it becomes part of their whole life. So it's lovely to hear. Have you come up with any sort of challenges while you've been doing this at all as well, from people who, you mentioned that some people are less keen, but generally sort of community wise, do you tend to get lots of positive support?
We're just blown away by the amount of support. And I think what's really interesting is a lot of people feel frustrated and a lot of people want to do something, but actually just by physically holding a small oyster in your hand and putting it back into the water is incredibly empowering. Yeah. And what we really, and we're getting so many requests from communities for advice, for help, to see if we could start up elsewhere, etc. And actually, there's very little negativity. The only thing is that it's difficult is getting these things going. But I think we've been at it now for sort of 3 years, and it's going to get easier. So it's very promising.
Amazing. Great to hear. Thank you so much, Danny. And so brilliant that Sea Changes again started this process. So all of these things that Sea Changes has instigated through some funding. So the next speaker that we have is going to be Becky. And Becky is going to be talking to us about the Seahorse Trust, obviously linked in with seagrass as well. So there's a nice link with all of these talks. So Becky, again, is there any, how was the link made with Sea Changes for the Seahorse Trust, and what impact did it have?
It's had a great impact, especially over the last couple of years. And we were aware of Sea Changes before then. I mean, we've always wondered what possible project could we do to get involved with Sea Changes. And then COVID hit. And then we were running a seahorse survey course for anyone who was interested in becoming able to survey seahorses, but also interested in seahorse ecology and biology. And we thought, well, you know, we can't do face-to-face anymore. We have no idea when we're going to be able to see people. So we came up with the idea of bringing forward a plan that we had for an online seahorse biology, ecology and conservation course. And thanks to Sea Changes funding, we've managed to get it developed. It's now live. It's been live for a few months. It's doing really well. And they also helped us support people who couldn't otherwise afford to do the course. So we've actually had some funded places as well, which has been really useful. And I know the people that have done it have been so grateful.
Fantastic. That's great to hear, and it's nice to make it accessible to all as well. So that's where these grants can be so helpful to not just be able to reach the people that we often do, but actually reach new people as well. So that's great to hear. Lovely. So Becky, I shall let you share your presentation. And how did you become involved in the Seahorse Trust? Is that something that you've been linked with for some time?
Yes, so I started with Seahorse Trust back in 2009. I was a diver and always had a keen interest in seahorses, and decided, you know, to approach Seahorse Trust, see if they needed any survey divers. Luckily, I had the right qualifications to join in, and then that was it. I was smitten. I was very lucky the year that I took part in my first survey dives. We saw 44 seahorses.
Wow.
And I think, well, they're not the easiest thing to find, but I found my first one, I think it was my third dive in. So yeah, no, and since then I've been absolutely hooked, and I've been working with the trust ever since.
Brilliant, lovely. Well, I look forward to hearing more about it. I'll let you carry on. We can see the slides, so
Oh, good.
great stuff. All right, thanks, Becky.
Thanks. Yes, so my name is Becky. Hello, everyone. I started obviously working with Seahorse Trust back in 2009, and there's a lovely picture of me in a second. There we go. There with me, my first seahorse. The Seahorse Trust was established in order in 1999 to conserve and protect seahorses. Neil Garrick Maidman, who set up the trust, had actually been working with seahorses since 1978. He's an aquarist originally, helped setting up many different aquaria within the UK and elsewhere. And seahorses was something that he worked primarily on. And before 1999, it was pretty much recognised that seahorses didn't live in the UK, although they had been sighted here. People believed that they were sort of a summer visitor who just came over. But a breeding pair of seahorses were discovered at Studland, and then that sort of established the Seahorse Trust and the need to find out more. Our work is supported by a massive group of volunteers, and we really couldn't exist without them. The Seahorse Trust is tiny as a charity. It's basically Neil. There's one employee, the rest of us are all volunteers, all trustees, and basically the wide range of backgrounds that we have from our volunteer community is fascinating, and they help us with all different areas, from diving to fundraising and to helping on our campaigns, all different things, and I'll hopefully cover that through this presentation and hopefully inspire some of you to also get involved with us. So seahorses, everyone's always fascinated by them. They are, very strange looking creatures. And we have two species that are native to the UK. We've got the short-snouted seahorse, which you can see, which is a slightly darker seahorse in this image with a very short snout. I think of them as like little bouncers. This one was actually found in an area that's quite rocky, but the vegetation that was there was very, very dark green seaweed, hence its colour. Some of you may have seen images of short-snouted seahorses, which are quite brown, and they're generally the seahorses that are found in more of a light sediment rocky area. Short-snouted seahorses prefer that sort of habitat, whereas the spiny seahorse that you can see is bright yellow. They tend to be in seagrass beds, that's their preferred habitat, and we don't generally see much of a different coloration in them. So here you can see the distribution for the short-snouted seahorses, and this is taken from a lot of the sighting information that we have. Some of you may be quite interested to know they're so far north. We do have sightings for them. We've got about 2,500 sightings, I think, for seahorses now in the UK on our British seahorse database. We have a database for the UK, but we also have a world database too. So if you ever get any sightings information, please do let us know, because it's all very, very valuable. And if you want to take a look at where seahorses may or may not have been seen, have a look on our website, because we actually have got a map on there. You can have a look, but obviously it doesn't pinpoint them. As a protected species, we wouldn't be able to do that. And then you can also see, the areas that you can see here in red, where we know that the spiny seahorse is found generally, again, due to seagrass beds. So, it's great to hear this amazing work that's being done with Seagrass Restoration. And, that's a perfect habitat for these spiny seahorses, but we mustn't forget the short-snouteds. They are there too, and they do prefer the other habitats. So our main study site has been Studland Bay. Down in Dorset. Don't know if many of you have been there. Basically, its beauty is its downfall. It's just, everyone loves it. They go there on their boats, they travel there. It's a beautiful place to enjoy. And as I say, a breeding pair of seahorses were discovered there, and since then there's been survey work every season since then to find out how many individuals are there and to find out a bit more about these seahorses. We didn't really know much about them, to be honest, to start with. A lot of the information that was available was from those in captivity, so being able to study them in the wild was really valuable. So being able to find out about their territories. They do have territories and they do fight each other. I don't know if some of you saw our latest footage of 2 males and a female, and that's how they fight each other. They just snap at each other. It's not very excitable, if you like. We found out a lot about their reproductive behaviour, their seasonal migration as well. They come inshore for the summer and head back out into sort of slightly deeper water during the winter due to the storm patterns. And we've also got so much more to learn about them as well. And our diver community and the surveyors and volunteers we've got helping with that really are helping. We also think a lot about the Studland community. And when we first went there, there was a lot of we had a lot of support, but we also had a lot of suspicion. And you have to be aware of your communities and make sure that they understand where you're coming from, but also you need to understand who they are. So this is just like a quick word cloud of the different communities that we were aware of at Studland. There are many more, and they all have different objectives. So you have some people who are just happy. There's seahorses, that's fantastic. Let's tell everyone that, you know, they're here, and, you know, let's support them and let's protect them. And you have those that don't really want to support them because there could be a change in the way that they live their lives. And it's very, very important to get the right messaging out to the communities, that you know that you are there to support them as well as the community and the seahorses. And one of the things we've been driving for many years is to put in eco moorings and to try and reduce the pressure of the boat traffic onto the seagrass beds, particularly at Studland. So we take part in many events. This is the annual Seahorse Swim. Sadly, didn't take place last year, where lots of enthusiastic swimmers go off swimming around the bay and raise a lot of money for the trust, which we always very, very grateful for. And we take part in lots of other community events as well. But our online community is really where we get a lot of our support. We're across different social media. Some of you may have seen that over the weekend we launched our latest campaign, #HappySeahorse, which is aimed at divers and snorkelers to raise the awareness of, if you are lucky enough to see a seahorse, how to interact with it and hopefully get less of a response from the seahorse. Unfortunately, seahorses are so beautiful and lovely and great, but they are rubbish. They are so good at getting stressed, and unfortunately when they get stressed they have, and there's been a lot of work to do with what happens to them when they get stressed and diseases that come out, and they just become ill very, very quickly, and unfortunately it can cause them to die. So we are running this campaign over the summer, and hopefully you'll see a lot more about it. Our most successful campaign so far was the Not For Sale campaign on seahorses. They were being quite easily found on Facebook, Etsy, eBay for sale and other platforms, and we've been working alongside them for a couple of years now, to basically have a full reporting system with them, so that if any seahorses are put up for sale, that they are immediately taken down, unless obviously the person selling it has the correct papers to do so. So, you know, it's been a really, really successful campaign, and we always, you know, want to work together with partners, and we have a lot of those. But one thing we've always learned is that without education, there is no conservation. If we don't make people aware why things are important, they're just not going to take ownership for it, and that's understandable. So initially we've done a lot of work with schools, and we've got an education pack on our website, but we decided to start targeting those people who could actually help us and support us as divers. So we were running our Seahorse survey course, and here are some of the people that came through back in the days when we could do face-to-face courses. And I'm really looking forward that we'll be able to start these again soon. We've run a virtual one a few months ago, which part of it is our new online course that was funded by Sea Changers, and the rest of it is a couple of webinars with myself. So we are running another one of those again next month. And then of course the online course that's now developed, and it's got 13 sessions in it. And people are able to just work their way through it at their own pace. There are some quizzes, there's a learners community online, and lots of different resources, and we've had lots and lots of great feedback. There have been little teething troubles as well, but that's understandable with a new online course, but we've managed to fix those, and it's been working really smoothly. And the little seahorse in there in the corner, we had one of our participants, Christy, she said it was amazing. She really enjoyed it. She sent us a full feedback on it. And there's quite a lot of people who've been finding it that it's actually inspired them to go on and do the survey course as well, and hopefully get involved in our survey dives. But we must remember, obviously, that a lot of education, we need to aim at a younger audience. And this course really is for those that, you know, a little bit older. So we have been partnering up with the Great Outdoors, and they have developed a activity bundle which is based around the Seahorse Trust's original education resource. And here are some very happy people on the beach who've been making ground art, using all different things on the beach to make seahorses, and there's all sorts of different activities you can do through that as well. So, you know, please do have a look. If you want to get involved with us, please do. You can get in touch with us through these different channels. Drop us an email if you're interested in, you know, survey diving, or you want to volunteer to help us with different things. Please do, and keep in touch. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was amazing again, with just one inspiring talk after another. Lovely to see lots of young people, smiling faces, learning about the marine environment as well. Always good to see. And Joe, you mentioned about social media as well, just to say that Rachel and Helen have also posted that please do share anything about the talks that you're listening to today. And you can include the @BeASeaChanger account, as well as any others from the Seahorse Trust, as well as the Seagrass project. And if you hashtag SeaChanger is 10, that's hashtag SeaChanger is 10. Brilliant. So what's the next big goal then, Becky? Have you got any other sort of aspirations with this?
We do have a couple of big projects coming up, and I can't unfortunately say anything.
Oh, a little teaser.
We were hoping to, because we were supposed to be releasing some information last week, but we've had to hold off. But yes, please do, you know, keep an eye on our social media, because there will be a good press release coming out soon, some really good news. So yes, just stay in touch with that one. But yes, we are looking now to, you know, what we can do with our courses, and we're just hoping to get our face-to-face ones going, and we'll be at quite a few events through the summer as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to rub shoulder to shoulder again with those.
Yeah,
great
and
stuff.
hopefully we'll have a lot more seahorses this summer again as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's fantastic, and really look forward to your news with that little teaser, not telling us much, but enough to keep us interested. Thank you. So we'll keep posted on that, and presumably you'll be announcing it on social media if people want to hear as well. Is it @the Seahorse Trust, is it?
Oh, this is the confusing thing. It's @Seahorse Charity on Twitter, but it's Seahorse Trust on Instagram.
Okay, great. So @Seahorse Trust on Twitter. Brilliant. Thank you, Becky. And we're moving away slightly now from the sort of the seagrass habitat to a different area. So I was actually fortunate enough to spend some time with Rachel and Helen at the National Lobster Hatchery, and we went on a dive where we got to release some of these baby lobsters, which I'm sure Chris is going to tell us all about. Chris, do you want to switch your camera on?
Yes.
Oh, I can hear you, but you sound a little bit like a robot right now, but hopefully that'll sort itself out in a minute.
Okay, yeah, quickly.
Yeah, that's better. It might be that if you keep the camera off, it'll keep the audio sounding a little better there. Brilliant. So look forward to hearing more. Myself, Rachel and Helen had an amazing day where we gave one of our grant checks to the National Lobster Hatchery back in 2009-ish, perhaps, quite a long time ago, maybe not that long ago. So again, could you just share how the Sea Changers has supported the National Lobster Hatchery in the past?
Yeah, so I think that was possibly the first grant for Sea Changers. I know I spoke to Rachel the other day, and she said that the very first grant from Sea Changers came to us to help our kind of general hatchery work. But I think there's been various little projects over the past decade or so that Sea Changers have helped out with, which we're hugely grateful for. I think I've actually got here somewhere a little book there, Claude Gets His Claws, which is a children's book that we wrote, and that was actually funded, the printing of that was funded by Sea Changers as well. So yeah, lots of little projects like that have really helped us reach a little bit more of an audience in terms of the book, but also just to expand our work in terms of the on the ground conservation work as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. And you've also got an amazing visitors sort of centre in Padstow, which I have visited. Totally recommend anyone who can get there in current times to go up and have a look. It's lovely to see the whole sort of process. I haven't been there for a while, but I'm sure the displays are even better now than last time I visited. So great place to visit, and again an amazing project which does incredible things to restock lobsters, which I'm sure you're going to tell us all about now. So if you want to share your screen and then leave it to you, Chris.
Yeah. There we go. So hopefully you can see a presentation there.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Chris.
So what I'll do is I'll just talk to you a little bit about us and our and lobsters themselves, and how our work fits in with the conservation of the European lobster, which is the species that we work with here at the hatchery. And then I'll also go on to explain a little bit about how we involve as many people from different communities and stakeholders as we can to kind of enhance the work that we do around conserving those lobsters as well. So to start with, then just a little bit about lobsters themselves, their biology and their life cycle. So lobsters generally known by the general population, I think, as kind of a food species. It's something you eat. It's a premium thing to eat. But they actually have this amazing biology and life cycle to go along with that, I suppose. But arguably, from our point of view anyway, more important than what they end up as in most people's opinion. So generally, they start life as an egg, and they can spend around about 9 months to a year or so developing as an egg under a female's tail. Throughout that time, the female will nurture them, keep them oxygenated and clean before they hatch. Upon hatching, they become part of the zooplankton in their larval stages. So they'll hatch out of the egg into the water column and become part of the plankton, drift away in the ocean currents. Very little parental care, no parental care at that point. They're very vulnerable to predation, certainly from filter feeding fish and things like that. And quite a lot of them, unfortunately, don't make it past those larval stages naturally. If they are lucky enough to get past those first few weeks or a month of their life, they will start to settle out on the seafloor as what we call early benthic juveniles. So they'll look for crevices or holes between cobblestones, holes in reefs, things, nice hard structures that they can hide themselves away or burrow down into. And at this point, there's much less predation, so they're much less likely to get eaten by predators. After a couple of years or so, they'll start to come out much more and openly forage as adult lobsters do, and then they won't reach maturity and contribute to the population reproductively until they're around about 5 to 7 years old. So quite a slow, growth and quite a long time to reach that breeding age. So as I mentioned, they're generally seen by the majority of the population as something you can eat, and they are very popular, as I say, as a premium product in a lot of seafood restaurants. So there is a big fishing drive to catch them, mostly through a baited pot fishery. So smallish boats generally work anything from 100 or a couple of hundred pots through to a couple of thousand pots. And particularly in the UK, it's quite an important part of our fisheries catch. We supply around about 3/4 of the catch of the European lobster in Europe. So important economically, but also culturally for small fishing communities. It's something that a lot of them rely on alongside a few other species quite heavily on for their income. However, this combined with the fact, like I mentioned, that they grow quite slowly and take quite a long time to reach maturity, they're also very vulnerable in their early stages, means that they are vulnerable to population collapses. So, and this has been seen in other places in Europe, most notably in Scandinavia in the late 20th century. Overfishing led to the population collapsing to a point where it was no longer economically viable to fish for lobster. So that's something we obviously want to avoid happening. We want to maintain a healthy population here in the UK, not only to support fishers economically and the communities that they support, but also just to maintain the population in terms of its ecology, so it can be part of the system that it's supposed to be part of naturally as well. So how to do this then? So there are various different ways. Firstly, in terms of laws and bylaws that are in place to try and conserve lobsters. So a couple of these, for example, are there's a minimum landing size. So throughout Europe, there's a minimum landing size, but then in different regions, it can vary. The idea behind a minimum landing size is that you protect your animals to grow old enough to reach a size where they're able to breed before they're able to be fished for and landed into port. And another example is recently in England, there's been a buried hen landing ban. So that's your egg-bearing female lobsters. They are no longer able to be landed into English ports. The idea behind that being you're protecting your breeding stock better, because they're not allowed to be landed for half or 3/4 of the year or so, and they will then contribute better to the population reproducing naturally. So how do we as a hatchery fit into those kind of conservation methods? Well, we are we kind of use the life cycle of the animal to its advantage, essentially. So we, in a nutshell, look after those very vulnerable small planktonic larval animals in those first few weeks of their life. We remove the predation factor from them then, and then we release them back into the sea when they become juveniles, when they start to burrow in the seabed, and they're much better able to survive and more likely to make it through to adulthood and contribute to the population themselves. So the way that we do that is we first of all have to acquire our broodstock, so those breeding female animals with eggs on under the tail. And we do this by working with local fishermen around Cornwall, here where we're based in Padstow in North Cornwall, but we work with guys all around Cornwall to bring these female lobsters into us. Like I mentioned, it is now illegal for fishermen in England to land those egg-bearing lobsters. So the guys we work with are specially licensed by the Marine Management Organisation in order to bring them to us, but they can only bring them in if they're coming to us. So we'll go out and collect those broodstock animals, bring them into the hatchery, and as the name suggests, we will let them hatch. We will rear the larvae through those very vulnerable early stages in controlled conditions with no predators. We will then let them grow through into those juvenile stages where they become benthic, and we will get them out for release then onto really good types of habitats, as I mentioned, reefs, cobblestones, places with lots of cover, for them to hopefully have a much better chance of reaching adulthood from that stage. And from previous studies, we think that around about 50 to 80% of those animals at that early juvenile stage that are released will then make it through to adulthood. So that is, in a nutshell, what we do in terms of our physical conservation, our hatching and restocking program to maintain a population as best as possible around the coast of Cornwall and the southwest. But it's really only half the story. So to kind of tie in with the message of involving communities and people in our work, if we're doing this work on the ground and replenishing stocks physically, that's great. But if we're not telling other people about it and also involving them in issues and starting conversations about the conservation of lobsters and wider marine conservation, then we're only doing kind of a proportion of what we could be doing with this. So some of the ways that we do that then, first of all, like Maya mentioned, I think the visitor centre that we have here attached to our hatchery has a small display aquarium and loads of information. We have people that staff on hand all the time when we're open that people are able to talk to about these issues. We have on average about 45,000 people a year come through the visitor centre. And like I say, it's just an opportunity to kind of start conversations with people that might not have otherwise seen lobster as something that was even under threat, or didn't understand the intricacies of how they live and the problems that they face as a result of overfishing, but also as other environmental factors they might face. Also outreach in local communities, so similar to the visitor centre, I suppose, in terms of engaging with the general public, but so recently we've been involved with quite a lot of beach cleans in North Cornwall with an organisation called Beach Guardian. We've gone down and done a few lobster releases, so that's been a really nice thing to do at the end of the beach clean for people to be able to see our work kind of up close and personal. We also take part in formal education, so we've created Key Stage 1 to education packs in the last few years that we've been able to give out to schools with lots of lobster and marine conservation themed activities for kids to be getting on with, but also visits to the hatchery, although that hasn't happened too much in the last year. Obviously a lot of it's been online as we are now, but that's a great way of involving everyone from kind of secondary school age right through to university level education, to combine lectures with actually seeing the hatchery process happen as well on site here in Padstow, or through a webcam as it has been for the last year. And then there's volunteering as well. So we're a relatively small charity, but we have anything roughly between 10 and 15 volunteers that help us with our general kind of operational requirements at any one time. And then there's other volunteer interest groups. So dive groups come to mind, for example, for releasing our animals, where we'll send animals out and divers will release them for us on really good types of habitat. So lots of different ways of people getting involved voluntarily, and we're super thankful for all that they do in terms of helping us run our project day to day. So I suppose the way I see it, and the way we work with people outside of the organisation as well as operationally with our day-to-day work, is we kind of create this cycle of conservation activity, if you like, in that we work with the fishermen who we rely on in order to get us our broodstock in the first place. We then rear and release those animals, and fishermen benefit, but also local communities benefit as well from those juveniles being released. But while this is all going on, it's quite a tangible, quite an obvious form of conservation, especially as the hatchery is quite visible. So if you're in the visitor centre, you're able to observe what's going on in the hatchery. It gives the opportunity to create this interest, and then through that kind of draw people in, have those conversations, and then pass on the knowledge that we have about the species, its conservation, its biology, and open up conversations about wider marine conservation as well with people that otherwise might not have been interested. So just to sum up then, I suppose, just the general idea that our view is that the most stakeholders in a fish species that's being exploited as a food source, generally up to a point, want the same thing. We all want a long-term sustainability in the population of that animal, whether that be lobster or the ecosystem or whatever it is. So our view is that by working together and working with the type of fishermen that are working on a small scale, not having too much impact, and in promoting those people, in a sense, we're better able to achieve that goal of a more sustainable outlook for the future of the animal. But then through doing that, like I mentioned, it's an opportunity to engage, enthuse people by seeing what we're doing hands-on, getting involved, getting up close with the releases, and things like that. And comes back to a point which I think Becky touched on previously as well, is that you can only really care about something if you understand it and if you experience it even more so. So the more people we can get involved and get up close and personal with these types of conservation, then hopefully the more people will go away from that thinking, yes, that's a priority for me. I want to look after this animal, or just the environment that it relies on and that we rely on a broader scale. So yeah, thank you very much as well for MBA and for Sea Changes for inviting us along. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and any questions, do pop them in the Q&A and I'll get back to you on them. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chris. Again, just a lovely example of how people can engage with the marine environment through the project and through your education. And it is just such an integral part of what we do, I think, just to make sure people have that engagement and that love for what we all care about, our marine environment. And certainly seeing lobsters firsthand, and particularly seeing the little tiny weeny baby lobsters that myself, Helen and Rachel had to waft into the rocky seabed was an incredible experience. And it really sort of brought home the power of that we have got to be able to restore and hopefully work towards sustainability of species like the lobster. And of course, with the lobster, seafood does come nice bottles of wine occasionally. So it might be just worth me mentioning here that Sea Changers have also been working with Sea Change wine. And because I'm patron, I've obviously had to sample this and buy a couple of bottles myself, and can say that it's very, very nice wine. And not only that, but there's a discount for listeners today. So the details of that is under the chat under SC Decade 10, and you can get 10% off your wines at Sea Change Wine, and the money goes towards marine conservation. So win-win all round, really. So enjoy a bottle of Sea Change wine if you can. And also there's another opportunity. Coast Magazine have also supported these events and are our media partner, and you can get your free copy of Coast Magazine, which is also linked into the chat. So sit down, have a glass of wine, read a Coast Magazine, and think about all these fantastic talks and how Sea Changes has made a huge change. So thank you, Chris. That was great. Really good to hear. And do head up to Padstow if you can. Probably not in the silly season. Try and go in a quieter time when you can sit and stare at the lobsters. Great, thank you very much. I bet it is. I bet it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but definitely do pop along. Definitely do pop along. We've got room. We've got room.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Brilliant. Right. So we shall move on from the lobsters, moving up towards the apex predators now. And we're going to hear from Rebecca. Rebecca Gillham from the Shark Trust, as I mentioned before. And again, we're going to be hearing about safeguarding a future for sharks. And Rebecca, so how was it that Sea Changers and the Shark Trust got worked together?
So Sea Changers very kindly funded some products that went towards our angling project. So in particular, supporting responsible angling through best practice handling guides and posters, etc. So we've received two rounds of funding from them, which has been great. So thank you very much.
Brilliant, that's good to hear. Right, so sharks are a topic that lots of people love, and I can tell from your smile that you do too. So I'll just ask you to share your screen and then we'll hear from your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya.
Perfect, yeah, all good, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, thank you very much to Sea Changers for inviting us along, and congratulations on your 10-year anniversary. As I mentioned, I'm Rebecca and I'm a conservation officer at the Shark Trust. So we're a charity based down in Plymouth in the UK, but we work internationally to safeguard sharks, skates and rays and chimeras. And the local community are at the heart of a lot of what we do, not only as a membership organisation, but also through our citizen science projects. So I'm going to give you a very whistle-stop tour through our citizen science projects and how we actually utilise the data that we gain from these projects and the input of the local community to conservation in the real world. So starting off with our angling project, catch and release has long been the advised and preferred fishing practice amongst recreational sea anglers. But there's still a lot we don't know about post-survival release rates for different species. So we promote responsible angling through the development of different resources. For example, this particular best practice shark and ray angling poster that you can see, and this is actually the one that was most recently supported by Sea Changers. And this was developed last year in time for summer. So on the first side, on the left-hand side, you can see best practice advice for handling sharks and skates and rays, so what to do, what not to do. And on the reverse side, on the right-hand side, you can see the latest conservation statuses for key species that are found around the UK and the British Isles. So the purpose of this project is to raise awareness for the diversity of sharks around the UK, but also just to ensure that minimal injury is inflicted on the shark or skate or ray, and also for safety for the angler as well. And not to mention, anglers are actually very well placed to record really interesting information. So it's also to encourage species-specific reporting as well. Next up, we have the Shark and Ray Entanglement Network, or SHAREN. So we collaborate with the University of Exeter and citizen scientists for this project. And the purpose of it is just to find out more information about the susceptibility of sharks and rays to pollution and marine debris. So for example, scientists at Exeter University want to know if there are any entanglement hotspots, if there are any particular debris affecting sharks and rays, so for example, fishing gear or plastic pollution, that kind of thing. And also which species are more at risk. Is it dependent on habitat preference, size of the body and shape of the body, or are highly migratory species more impacted? So that's encouraging divers, you know, dog walkers, people going to the beach to record anything that they see. Moving on swiftly, we've got our shark sightings database project, and our Basking Shark project feeds into that. And again, this is just to create more data for scientists and researchers around the world through the recording of live and dead sharks and rays. And sorry, when I say sharks and rays, I'm speaking about skates and chimeras as well. But it's also to record any unusual sightings. So if something has washed up where you wouldn't expect it to be, or any unusual colour morphologies, anything at all. So it creates more data again that we can share with other researchers and conservationists that are working on sharks and rays around the colour. The more information that we have and the longer data sets we have, the better, the quality of the data and the better we are able to protect these amazing species. And in order to support kind of species-specific identification in the public, people aren't always seeing these species. We actually have identification guides and other resources online for all of these projects that you can access. Okay, so our Great Egg Case Hunt is one that maybe more people have heard of. It's our longest running citizen science project, so it's been going for 18 years now. And it's to record spent or empty washed up egg cases or underwater egg cases as well. And also just to engage the public in shark conservation. So a lot of people still don't realise, that sharks, actually some species of sharks do reproduce by laying eggs. And often we've had a lot of people, think that it's a bit of seaweed or bark or whatever it is, and they don't realise that actually, these are these mermaid persons, as they're often called, once had a live shark inside of them. So it's just, it's a really exciting way for kids and adults as well to get involved in shark conservation. And we are able to utilise the data to kind of map species diversity, but also broad distribution of egg-laying sharks and states. Around the British Isles is where it kind of first started, but it's kind of been expanding and expanding. So we now receive records from all over the world. And one great thing about this is that whilst obviously spent egg cases, empty egg cases that are washed up, they give us an idea of potential egg laying and nursery grounds for oviparous elasmobranchs. Underwater egg cases help to ground the truth of kind of what's actually out there in any nursery grounds. So we support the public and the local communities. Again, species specific identification is key, and the more accurate the data, the better. So we provide these identification guides, these educational resources to help them. And on the left, we've got the 13 species you're kind of most likely to find. Some more common than others. The top row and the cat sharks, the nest-head and the small spotted in particular, you'd more often find around the British Isles. We also have an app and then kind of the junior fun egg case guide on the right. So to date, we've had over 300,000 records of egg cases recorded to the Great Egg Case Hunt, which is amazing. As you can see, from about 2013, 2014, we had a real increase in data, in records to the project every year. And on average, we probably get around 35,000. And even last year, during COVID, we still had a lot of egg cases. We were really curious to see what would happen. But we believe that the increase in records is a result of kind of an increase in the beach clean movement, also recording apps, people using their smartphone a lot more to record information like this. But yeah, it's still been going from strength to strength, which is great to see. And as I mentioned, so it started off in the UK, and we have a really good representation of records from around the UK, and pretty much every coastline is represented. We have lots of regular recorders that all have submitted thousands of egg case records from the UK. And now we are getting egg cases from, I think we've had records from 5 continents. We get records from commercial fisheries, from scientific surveys, from fish markets, from, just your average person kind of walking along the beach with their dog. So it really is a community effort on a global scale. So one exciting thing that's come from the Great Egg Case Hunt is that we do get some unusual finds, which is always really interesting and mind-boggling as well. So this particular one is, we had 2 unusually large starry skate egg cases submitted. One of them on the left was from Borth in Wales, and we've got another one that came from Shetland. And as you can see, they're kind of double the size of the 2 on the right. They would be the average size, so between 32.7 and 36.7 millimetres, kind of the average size from the North Sea. but the two that were recorded on the left were almost double. And we're unsure whether these were kind of drifted over from the Northwest Atlantic. So the starry skate egg cases from the Northwest Atlantic are a lot larger. So that's a possibility, or if it's a hybrid. And as yet, we're unsure, but it's likely that a DNA testing would need to take place in order for us to kind of work out what is going on there. So to put this all into kind of how this actually works in conservation processes in the real world, all of this data that we collect, it's shared, and it's a real collaboration, which is great. So most recently, we've kind of shared egg case data with the Shetland Wildlife Trust, Ulster Wildlife Trust, and Nature Scott as well, as basking shark data has gone to them as well. I know that Becky mentioned Stunderland Bay Marine Conservation Zone as an important area for seahorses and seagrass as well, as we mentioned. It was actually as a result of great egg case hunt data that we identified both the Purbeck Coast and the Studland Bay MCZs as important habitats for ungulate rays at different life stages, so for juveniles and at the egg laying stage as well. So using egg case data, we were actually able to submit towards the consultation process a number of times. And again, in the last kind of 6 months or so, egg case data has actually been shared with Nature Scott, who are responsible for kind of getting the urgent marine protected area for the flapper skate egg case nursery area designated in the Sound of Skye, which is amazing. Another output of all of this data is peer-reviewed papers, so just scientific research, and we've been able to work out the morphological characteristics of 13 species of egg-laying elasmobranch, so the ones that you saw in the poster on the left. As a result, we've got another paper in prep as well. So last but not least, we also are heavily involved in advocating for science-based catch limits for species. And the local community is so incredible and so important in our work advocating for sharks, and in particular, most recently, it's been for the shortfin mako. This has been for the last good few years, but ramping up again and we're continuing to go on this year as well. And we've had members of the community make time for mako, so they've done miles of every kind, running, climbing, sapping, everything that you could think of, and also just vocalising their support online before negotiations for ICAT as they come up in the next month or so. So as you can see, yeah, the local community is really important in all that we do. It's not just about the data, it's also just about creating just passion and changing people's perceptions of shark skates and rays. I think Chris and Becky both touched on the fact that, you know, to really care for something, you've got to experience something. And I think being able to pick up an egg case and know that it's from a shark, or being able to, you know, record something, it makes it a lot more tangible and creates a lot more passion and a lot more kind of drive to actually protect these species. So thank you very much again for inviting us to contribute. And if anyone would like to get involved in any of our projects, then please do visit our website.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca, so much. That's wonderful. And just a little, while we're talking sharks, we've actually got a Young Marine Biologist Summit, which I know that we're looking to get you involved in, I think, which is happening this November. And the theme of our Young Marine Biologist Summit is ocean predators this year. So ties in with your shark research, obviously draws lots of crowds here. Thank you. So unfortunately, we're sort of running a little bit short of time, but if I could just ask all the panelists to turn their cameras on, and Helen and Rachel as well, please, if you can come out of the darkness. Thank you very much. And just to show on the chat, there is a link to all of the events coming up soon. So there's one tomorrow, which sounds like a fantastic evening of talks from 7 p.m, which is about a film called Plastic Warriors, which is going to be on at cinemas. And Sea Changers have actually helped fund that. So that sounds like a really interesting evening there at 7 o'clock. You could drink your glass of Sea Change wine at that time, obviously. Nobody will know. So I just wondered if there's any particular particular questions or any particular comments from anybody. We did have one question about Claude Gets His Claws and where people might be able to buy that book.
Well, the best way to buy it is to come and visit us in Padstow, of course, and it's in our visitor centre. So you can definitely buy it in the visitor centre. There might be the odd copy floating around online. I don't think we sell it online. I'm not sure if it's on Amazon or something, but definitely visit us in Padstow. That's the best way to get hold of a copy. Brilliant,
thank you. And there's a question here from Sarah, who's a trustee, I think is that correct title? Yeah, trustee. So Sarah, there's all sorts of amazing people behind the scenes in Sea Changers. Helen and Rachel, co-founders. There's group of trustees and all sorts of various individuals that really support the nuts and bolts of Sea Changers. So a huge thank you to them over the 10 years. This doesn't come with a lot of blood, tears and sweat along the way, but hopefully today is a really good example of quite what that achieves. So Sarah's just asking about how the panel feels about biological assessment for suitability of projects. Given the limited resources, should funders or SNCB be doing this opportunity mapping, or should they be responding to communities to give specific feedback on specific sites? Anybody particularly like to answer that one? Is that you reaching for the mute? I thought you might do, Danny.
Well, I was going to just say that the funding is essential, but I mean, communities are essential in finding out what's out there. With the best will in the world, the agency is responsible for doing that and for mapping it. So for example, Nature Scotland just doesn't have the resources. So we know that we're finding things that are protected under Scottish law, but are not protected. And it's only because we can send divers down and we're interested and we can start logging this stuff that it's now on the databases. So I think, you know, supporting communities who want to do this stuff and who want to do the research is really essential, because it's providing the baseline data that just doesn't exist. And then that with that data, we can then start looking at restoration opportunities.
And I think that's what's also a common thread through all of the talks today, is that scientific rigor, and that this isn't just like little projects that people are doing. These are projects that are creating great wealth of data, which can then impact sort of policy and create real change. So that's super exciting to see and hear. Brilliant, thank you. Has anybody else got a comment on that?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Danny's saying. Really, is that it's, you know, little projects make a big difference. And you know, the funding that Sea Changers has done has made such a big difference in so many different areas. If you know, you give it to a bigger organisation to work out who should be funded for what, that doesn't work. They just don't have the resources themselves to do that. You know, seahorses, you know, wouldn't be protected if it hadn't been for the Seahorse Trust, because we wouldn't have known they were existing and we wouldn't know that they were breeding here. So, you know, it's that lucky find that someone in the community finds, and then they build up bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And you know, all of our projects, we're so grateful for Sea Changers and the difference they've made for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the appeal for me when I first had the conversation with Helen, was that this was about small ground root projects that were making huge change, you know, and I knew that the direction and passion that Rachel and Helen have was to create change, you know, and this money was to work towards that. Helen and Rachel, would you, Jack, would you like to spotlight Helen and Rachel a minute? And just wondered if you'd had anything, you've got a face of fear there, Rachel, if there's anything else you'd like to say at all. But before you do, just to say a huge thank you to you both for all of your hard work. You've been amazing, you're inspirational, and loved working with you. You are fab, love you to bits. But yes, is there anything else you'd like to say?
I know you're trying to make us cry. Just thank you to all the projects for giving up their time this afternoon. It's really, I mean, it isn't often that we step back from what we're doing and hear what our money has enabled, and it is genuinely moving for us, because this is what we wanted to do when we set out, and it's really incredible to hear that it's working, that it's, you know, creating change and helping often quite small projects to kind of get started and so on. That was the original idea. So we're really thankful that people came and told everyone about that, and we hear a bit about it, but even we don't get to hear very much. So it's really been fantastic.
Good, great stuff. Helen, do you want anything to add to that?
Once I just keep quiet.
That's very unlike you. Great stuff. Well, thank you both, and thank you to everyone at Sea Changers, and thank you to all of the speakers today as well, talking about your projects. It's been really inspirational, lots of ocean optimism there, and I'm sure it'll be very lovely for lots of young people to hear all of the positive things that are happening for change as well. So we do hope to be able to share the videos later stage, so people can share them with their communities, and they can hear some of the speakers today and all that they've done. So. Anybody else have anything to say before we sign off for the day and go and drink some Sea Change wine? Final plug, and Coast Magazine, and get the tea-mail. And also, if you wanted to make a small donation for having had this wonderful couple of hours of talks, please do go to the Just Giving page, and your money will help contribute to amazing projects as you've heard of today. So please do it all, and thank you everybody for joining us today.